Alright gamers, apparently it's time for a re-review of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire alongside Emerald for good measure. Last time I covered these games, let's just say the corporate shill allegations were not being beat. So today I'm here to correct the record as unbiased as possible, because maybe one day I'd like to be a source of credible information instead of living in the delusion that the game I played when I was a child is actually the craziest thing ever. After all, as the biggest Gen 2 equals bad truther, how far off is Gen 3 if at all? It can't just be this magical spike in quality that fell off instantly when the 4th generation finally rolled around, can it? Well, that's what you're here to see. From Ruby and Sapphire's still limited nature, to Emerald's massive quality jump that's probably more limited than it seems. And to ensure the biased allegations are being taken out back, I am not alone today. Renowned PokeTuber Mystic Umbreon will be joining me today as yet another trusty source of information. Sadly, due to my terrible formatting of these videos, so don't act surprised when he shows up 24 minutes in. It's not a jump scare if you're aware in advance. Please go check him out afterwards if you haven't yet. His help was greatly appreciated. Anyways, that covers our intro. Are the games overhyped or just kind of mid? Let's find out. Up first, of course, is the Hoenn region's fruitful offering and the gameplay alterations it hosts. Starting with the play space specifically, things are off to a better start than any region prior, featuring plenty of side areas that are completely optional, plenty of dungeons to simply go deeper in, actual elevation that ascends past simple ledges, new environmental pieces to interact with in various means, too much water but it's actually not a joke, and a cave that only exists for plot to magically vanish like a fever dream. The areas are more dynamic, visually appealing, and simply have more to them. Yes, even the simple ones that still have the old "it's just a flat plains area" vibe, usually for the better. The real letdown, if anything, is just the post-game offering very little. An area with a nice platforming challenge and a pitiful boat really isn't much, as a minor toppings to a pretty swell pizza. Now, how is that region laid out? Yeah, that's the pineapple we've got to look at, because yes, it does have issues. Starting the game, the first hour throws 3 small backtracks at you pretty quickly, with the walk back to the lab post-Rival 1, the trip back to Oldale to start the adventure, and the walk back from Rustboro to take Briney's boat. Again, all 3 are done fairly fast and are generally inoffensive. Now, our 4th run for Meteor Falls all the way to Mount Chimney is a lot and a bit insulting. Both that and our 5th issue of running back to Petalburg may at least score you your strength HM, despite how lengthy that trip is. 6th in line is running or surfing back to Mauville post-Norman, being the least painful of this batch. 7 with your departure from Mount Pyre all the way to Slateport, or Magma Hideout in Emerald, which is a backtracking trip in itself, where after the long trek here, you gotta do 1 dash dialogue and repeat the damn process, needing potentially more backtracking if you want a fly point, being a disgusting final trip as number 8. Although actually last in line is simply returning back to Pseudopolis from setting Rayquaza free in Emerald. So, plaguing our pretty damn nice sandbox to run around in, Ruby and Sapphire grant us 8 total backtracking trips, and Emerald makes it 10, examples of a world layout not being so finely tuned well enough. In fact, Mount Pyre alone is basically shackling a fly user to your party, although as far as HMs as a whole go, Cut is completely optional and does nothing of value. Flash is completely optional, but you'll likely want it for Victory Road. And of course, Fly is theoretically skippable, but we just saw why you're not going to go without. Meanwhile, the everything else of Surf, Dive, Waterfall, Rock Smash, and Strength will be at your knees, nibbling away as you essentially have to waste precious team building opportunities, either move slots or full team members, just to fit them. Although getting these mandatory HMs, sadly, suffers quite a bit from early Pokemon game design. Rock Smash and Dive follows the ideology of walking into random houses hoping to find something through exploring, where Emerald at least points you in the right direction for Dive. Surf requires you to walk into a house that you're at least given useful dialogue to go find. Meanwhile, Emerald just drags you out to it, Strength needing you to go out of your way towards an optional town to fetch. Meanwhile, Waterfall is just funny because it's just in a cave, completely missable if you refuse to use Flash. Meanwhile, in Emerald, it's just given with Fly, much like the other useful HM with Fly, but in both versions. It ends up leading HMs to be a bit of a hassle for first-time runs. Meanwhile, all but Strength are super easy to get in repeat runs, requiring next to no effort to fetch, while the other 2 optionals are at least easy enough to potentially wander into. So while HMs may be a bit tricky, surely the game gives us tools to alleviate their strain, right? You know, some kind of overworld movement tech, and oh boy, we've got 2 of these. As now going into Gen 3, we get the running shoes as a massive feature unlocked super early. This simply allows you to hold down the B button for a noticeable movement increase to make going places all over the world even easier. Unfortunately though, it's not all positives. As far as drawbacks of using it, we've got a few, like heightened encounter rates, forcibly baiting the attention of spinners in the overworld, and for some reason, they're just not usable indoors or in super tall grass, where the latter two drawbacks aren't that big of a deal. The first two at least give you incentive to walk with a result of some arbitrary reward. And finally, for our overworld section, even more further movement tech is given through the game's 2 new bikes. While only one could ever be held at a time, exchanged at the bike shop for free, the mock bike focuses on speed, allowing you to go up mudslides and across pits in the ground. Meanwhile, the acro bike is slower, meaning it controls better but features a bit more, like rail hopping and wheelie bouncing, where the latter actually has a side effect of letting you take more steps without ever leaving a tile, essentially being advanced tech that allows you to save steps for rappel manipulation or the Safari Stone step counter. These end up leaving both the bikes to be good exploration tools on top of just being a tool for a simple speed boost. Again, sadly stomped out by unmowed grass, which finishes our overworld bits. A fun but a bit rough around the edges, particularly in HM demand and backtracking issues, but basically positives everywhere else. Well, except for the one miserable change of the fishing nerf. Okay, imagine this. What if we made it more miserable by, instead of requiring you to click the A button once, what if you had to do it multiple times at random? Yeah, that's the worst change in the entire game, actually. But no matter, we get to go into the gameplay mechanics now. Yet again, gamers, a new generation means new battle mechanics to add more depth, personality, and complexity to the game. And with one exception I'll make clear later, basically everything in this laundry list is a positive of varying intensities. So we'll just start with the most decisive and strongest one. Yes, abilities. These serve as passive bonus effects that come attached for free to every single mon to exist, with the selection tied to each individual Pokemon, potentially having up to 2 choices, which is determined when encountered. And these effects are like opening Pandora's box when it comes to enhancing mons, from something game warping like weather setting abilities to something very niche like the ones that prevent stat drops, potentially adding new immunities outside of the type chart, to potentially power boosts that require you to be at low HP, potentially handicapping the Pokemon or making them blatantly broken, among so many other effects that truly never end. Why it's good is simple. Similar to movesets in a mon stat line, this serves as yet another means to make a Pokemon unique by giving them some more gameplay niches to tap into that other mons simply can't, potentially salvaging or burying mons even more than before through the battle alterations they provide. That's where things were supposed to end for abilities. But then Emerald happened, which expanded upon abilities even further, with add-ons absent from the other Gen 3 games, as here a certain lineup of abilities receive out-of-battle benefits just from simply being on your lead Pokemon during overworld gameplay. A couple of these add-ons here will include synchronized leads, potentially being able to force a Pokemon's own nature onto wild encounters to make getting desirable mons even easier, a compoundized lead with their ability to make items held by wild Pokemon more likely to appear, or for our last example is a near useless addition of Hyper Cutter, increasing the grass removal radius when using Cut in the overworld, as this feature's final showing. So yeah, just in case the feature that either gave mons stronger identities or performances wasn't great enough, others managed to actually have use cases where a secondary effect is to potentially cut on RNG shenanigans, or others is nothing short of great. But with RNG issues, of course, we have many. We just mentioned natures briefly, and that is a brand new mechanic as another means to make mons unique, as they're also determined when encountered. This time important for their performance in battle, being essential for min-maxing. 25 of these things exist, granting stat alterations depending on the one present, increasing or decreasing a stat by 10% of the initial value for the attack, defense, special defense, and speed stats. Notice that HP is excluded. Of course, the stats altered depend on which of the 20 natures is attached. There's also an additional 5 to that lineup that make no change, which for a playthrough sense leaves you with okay options, where regardless, the feature will provide variety every time. Although for getting optimal mons, it's yet another RNG check you'll be forced to tangle with in this duel, with a 1 in 25 chance on top of genders, potential ability 50/50s, and our next segue to the IV system, essentially being the same thing as the DV system prior. Once again being a luck factor upon mon generation, granting bonus stats that can't be altered, that once again alter the entirety of how a specific attack works. But it's different now, since instead of each of the 6 stats having one of 16 different stat points across 4 stats, with both the special stats tied together and HP determined from the other stats, now it's values from one of 32 different stat points, essentially having the overall effectiveness each stat grants. As previously at level 100, every EV granted 2 stat points. Now it's just 1 per, not being much as a positive due to even more suboptimal IV chances further gatekeeping you from perfect optimization, but at least we do have more hidden power ranges to work with, alongside all 6 stats now standing on their own. But more importantly, this change no longer ties a Pokemon's shininess to their clear IV, meaning it at least is theoretically possible for a shiny to match a normal mon in competitive viability, instead of always being handicapped at above average. Although due to all the luck factors involved, good luck. Lastly, for changes revolving around the mons themselves, we've got the reworked EV system. In times past, the EV system worked in a more boring, lax, and standardized way, earning a bunch of invisible numbers to all stats from defeating mons that'll eventually add up to 63 actual bonus stats in all of a mon's stats at level 100, with the progress on the special stats of course being tied together. Now though, each stat can be capped at 63 total stat points at level 100 through the new invisible numbers to make actually earning them a bit more simplistic and straightforward. But the actual catch is the fact that you can only distribute up to 127 different stat points across the 6 stats, only ever being able to cap up to 2 stats at a time, with only 1 point to spare. In actual gameplay speak, the old system had issues where 2 fully maxed mons facing each other really didn't make too big of a difference, as both mons would have the same speed, meaning turn order interactions would never change, while having both defense stats and the HP stat capped at once forces the overall power level to be toned down, being much slower, as it's always 2 capped defense stats clashing with 1 capped offensive stat. So finally with Gen 3, to counter what's basically a slower paced scene, this new system makes it to where you have to pick and choose where your stat investment goes out of your 127 stat points. To distribute, with only 2 stats capable, you have to choose where your mons excel with trade-offs. If you want fast offense, say goodbye to extra bulk. A bulky offense will unfortunately be slow. A bulky wall loses out on speed and offensive pressure as well, or your ability to simply get funky with it for winning pinpoint matchups. Although in the grand scheme of things, a playthrough of the game is just gonna leave your mons as a blob of whatever mess the game throws at you unless you want to grind out certain points. Something that really doesn't become plausible until many years in the future, leaving it to be a very post-gamey thing to partake in, otherwise succeeding at being another source of creative team building that allows many versions of the same mon to stand out doing different things, as the perfect way to round out the mon-specific mechanical updates. So how about we actually use these threats with the grand addition of double battles? Because 1v1s were too easy and very simplistic, we now have 2v2s as a battling option in various areas of the game. For the most part, double battles are really just 2 Pokemon fighting 2 other Pokemon, playing similarly to singles, but of course there's much more to it, as most attacks will only ever hit 1 target, one that you can pick among the 3 targets in battle, yes, your partner included, while others hit both foes or potentially all 3 mons on the field at once. Such a board state allows for even more attacks to see use, as some are of course intended for the mode, but others pack in valuable use cases that'll make them far more worthwhile. There are important things to know, however, a balancing act being spread moves, as hitting both targets is a very strong trait, so in an effort of balancing them, any spread move used will feature a 25% power cut when hitting 2 targets in order to stop them from being overkill. And lastly on this topic, we have 2 quirks exclusive to Gen 3 double battles. First being the HP bar, as the bar itself and the actual numbers just simply won't appear for your Pokemon simultaneously like they do in singles. Here, they need a single button toggle in order to show the actual numbers, which only really matters for stats nerds, although it's hard to call it exclusive when it does appear in a few other Gen 4 and 5 games. The second unique trait, on the other hand, is feigning just simply works a bit differently in this gen. In these games, if a Pokemon manages to feint, the next one will have to be sent in mid-turn all defenseless, potentially at the risk of feigning immediately from double targeting, as a super important tech that spans 5 different games. Needless to say, double battles are an excellent addition that turns the standard 1v1 format on its head, as 4 mons at once noticeably increases the pace of battle and changes the strategies to succeed in them quite a bit. The biggest sin of doubles is how little they get used across the series, and in these games in particular, you know we're gonna have a dedicated section on them later. Anyway, them's all the big important changes, which means we get to dive into a bunch of the niche stuff where I'm absolutely gonna miss some things. The first notable new comes to weather. While a thing in Gen 2, it went mostly underutilized as a gimmick at most. In Gen 3 though, it's finally becoming relevant. From abilities that are able to set the weathers or simply take advantage of them, to the overworld weather effects that allow them to carry over into battle. Reasons now exist to make weather feel like a proper part of the game, but that doesn't matter, as it's not technically the new I advertised. That would be hail as a 4th weather, which on its own suffers a lot from what the other weathers did before. No natural weather, no switch and setter, hell it doesn't even allow Blizzard to ignore accuracy checks in these games. Really, it's just an inferior version of sand, just needing a hero. Also, you're probably wondering why a natural setter or location that spawns weather is important. Well, simply put, unlike when you use source attacks, these other sources aren't on a timer, always remaining until the battle ends or is replaced. But don't worry, these games have it out against Blizzard spam specifically, as the free status condition thankfully had its defrost rate bumped up from 10% to 20% as an inarguable good, since it's still too low. But the choice to make defrosting only happen through attacking rather than at the end of the turn, it's certainly a choice that at least makes it more committal to the thaw, rather than leaving switching in as a potential free opening. Our next change is an odd one, and one you likely won't even think about in normal play, and it regards passive damage. In prior games, it was a bit funky, because if a Pokemon taking passive damage actually managed to KO its foe, once the new Pokemon would enter the field, the foe with the passive damage would just not take that damage, potentially making you miss out on KOs. Now in Gen 3, they properly take the damage regardless. Also, if we're going to talk about small changes, I know the Smogon players who would live on my walls if I refuse to mention the stackable spikes as if that's a new mechanic, when it's really just a move exclusive buff because not all hazards are even stackable, nor is just the second layer worth it. Okay, I mentioned a bad thing earlier in the section and it's time to pull off the band-aid. Paywalled Deoxys forms. So get this. Wait a minute, paywalled isn't really the right term, as this strain of alien herpes has multiple forms. Those are determined based on the game being played. The outclassed form in Ruby and Sapphire, the other outclassed one in Emerald, Big Stall registered trademark in Lift Green, with Fire Red taking the one that actually matters. So sure, ignoring the issue that causes this mon to have its unviable forms haunting these games in particular, this little mess causes fights against Deoxys to be a little bit up in the air, since regardless of which form you battle, it'll always display the normal form, leaving you completely out of the loop when fighting one, unless you just happen to know your opponent's game, or if they're just stupid enough to tell you. And finally, for gameplay quirks, it's actually one that takes place out of battle kinda, as the PC gets a massive overhaul. Instead of slow clunky menuing through lists of 20, now we've got boxes of 30 that are very easy to shuffle through with unique icons for all mons instead of a pitiful name list, now with simple menuing, where Emerald even allows you to move groups of mons at a time. The new box system is nothing short of spectacular, but why it's in the gameplay section is simple, because when your current box is full and you try to catch a Pokemon, the game actually lets you, automatically sending them to the next empty box. Yeah, instead of preventing you from ever trying to catch them in the first place, you are still able to catch them where it all ends. That's our battling systems, gamers. Yet again, another very needed step forward, cram-packed with loads of goodies to go around. And finally, we reached the part that most warranted a re-review, with a seemingly good showing. It's not all cracked up as it seems, being the playthrough. Kicking that off is the OK Pokemon offering, as starting off, Gen 3 graciously gifts us with 135 new Pokemon to the total lineup. Wow, that's great. We get a whole 386 Pokemon to use in these games. No, not at all actually. Not in the main game, and absolutely not catchable even in post-game. This gives us a bit of a mess that nowadays is referred to as a regional Pokedex. In the game total, from post to main game, we get a grand total of 200 mons to catch or battle throughout the world. This lineup includes every new mon, with 65 returning mons on top for decent variety, with 3 total being fully post-game blocked without any weird evolutionary line shenanigans. Well, you'd at least expect the variety to be good, because as usual, we get some types that exist in dire supply. With 5 as our benchmark for acceptable variety, 3 types struggle to hold on. Ice only having 3 options isn't great, considering how late game they all are. Ghosts lock in at 4, being 4 times the amount from the last 2 games, and Dragon comes just short at 4 surprisingly, actually reaching 5 in Emerald. Why 5 matters is because in a vacuum, you'll want options, both to use and to battle, but with these 3 types in particular, these are all represented in the game's Elite Four lineup, which yes, we're gonna see later as their inclusions will sabotage these monotype teams through forced dupes or unevolved mons in the final challenge. But don't worry gamers, water types sure as hell aren't suffering, with Sapphire packing 23 of these in the main game, while the other 2 games are fighting with 22. One example of too much water actually being a problem. But as for now, we've got an elephant in the room. What about the missing Pokemon? While completely absent from the Pokedex, the other 186 Pokemon could at least be traded in from the other Gen 3 games, fully functional despite how big of a mess getting them is. After all, there is no cross-gen transfer in these games at all. Anything you spent time with in Gens 1 and 2 is just stuck, impossible to bring forward, just to ensure Gen 3 is the most obnoxious gen in the world for team building and most importantly dex completion. But sure gamers, them's the mons, you got them, and now you're in the driver's seat, and other than move slots being eaten for HMs, what are your mons doing? Well, that's where things go a bit downhill. The trainer offering, releasing before Gen 4 specifically, is a death sentence for care put into the battling offerings across the game. The first ball dropped comes in double battles, because Ruby and Sapphire in particular only makes 1 mandatory across the entire game. Meanwhile, any other double battle must be opted into issue, as the trainers just don't have vision for some reason, leaving the gen's big thing to be nothing short of an afterthought. Moving past that, the boss trainers get caught lacking a bit too, featuring a rival who never gets their fully evolved starter, to Watson, who couldn't even fit any of the 3 new Hoenn electric types on his team. There's Flannery with 2 Slugmas for some reason. Don't worry, Norman also has duplicates, but much more power cracked. Our double battle gym leaders only have 2 Mons, which kind of kill the challenge they're supposed to provide, but then the E4 really spits in the open wound, providing 2 different duplicate pairs on Phoebe's team. Glacia also has 2 pairings of duplicates, but with the catch of one of them not even being evolved, featuring the evolution as the final Mon. Again, awful variety, but then Drake again has a pair of duplicates. Thankfully one this time, but wow again, there's an unevolved Mon of non-existent quality to hinder the team instead. But then you take a step back and holy hell, this lineup of typings is atrocious. Sydney with 2 Mono Darks, 2 Grass Darks, and 1 Water Dark leaves basically no useful defensive profiles at all. Phoebe takes that 3 steps forward with 4 Mono Ghost types alongside 1 Dark Ghost because most of her team needed to provide nothing unique at all. Glacia with 2 Mono Ices and 3 Water Ices ends up leaving your strategy against them requiring not much change at all. And finally, Drake's core that only sees Dragon with potential for extra flying or ground, both of which do pitiful jobs at diversifying your approach. Also no, Flannery's triple Mono Fire Core and Tate and Liza's typing copy and paste aren't exactly good either. But gamers, continue to worry. I know you love repetition, and the evil teams of course have that en masse, as regardless of which of the 2 versions you end up playing, they only ever use Mons from 3 evolutionary lines. And no more! You will see a bat, you will see a pooch, and you undoubtedly will see a shark or camel depending on which game you play, with 0 variety otherwise. I thought I was being overdramatic in Gen 2 with the radio tower spam, but good grief, this makes that look tame in comparison. But of course, bad variety, as always, can get worse through a bad level curve. And oh boy, does Gen 3 disappoint here. And of course, spoiler alert, the big issue here is because of the extinct mandatory trainer counts. Remember, mandatory trainers are the most important ones. They're the ones you have to fight to even reach your intended goal. Optional trainers are nice, but mandatory ones are the ones that matter most. Gym 1 desires you around level 14, yet only 3 battles are required to even get here. Gym 2 demands 17 in level, yet 2 battles are offered, thankfully with this gym being delayable. 22-ish by Gym 3, with at least 6 battles being mandatory to get here. Gym 4 suggests level 26, yet 4 trainers won't really get you here. Gym 5 wants 29-ish, yet only gives you 3 battles, all in the gym. Gym 6 for a level 31-ish, going almost nowhere for the fact that 6 trainers are needed to reach it. Again, thankfully delayable. Gym 7 wants 6 total force trainers to match up with low 40s, many of which are evil team grunts who are noticeably under-leveled. Well, that is compared to the unreasonable level jump that's here. And don't even get me started on the actual wild Pokemon on the water routes that range from 30s to single digits, or how spread out all the optionals are to make farming EXP less reasonable. The real reason too much water is an actual issue. A level jump that Gym 8 only attempts to one-up at best for some reason, which with 2 trainers mandatory, I guess seems okay, which would be the case if the evil team leaders didn't piggyback that level jump leveling wise, that is. And finally the E4, we're running 43s straight up to low 50s in a gauntlet that stretches from lows of 46 to a high of 58 for an Elite 4 level ladder of 12 levels for just a terrible leveling experience. Just 1 level short of matching the mess of the Sinnoh games. Of course, giving you the issues with leveling, where you'll either over-level the early E4 members, stomping them easily, or get curve stomped by the later fights because their levels take off into the stratosphere, which even the optionals you went out of your way to battle couldn't even begin to prep you for this run. Of course, encouraging the same game plan the first 4, technically 5 gens do, of belittling you down to only using 4, 3, potentially even a 2-mon team just to actually keep up with the level progression in the first place, as one of many forms of artificial difficulty, since the actual difficulty isn't really there, it's just the game trying to stat check you. Not to mention, you're probably going to overlevel in the mid-games if your team is too small. Needless to say, when we put it all out on the table, the experience of playing through these games is just annoying, from a pitiful enemy variety to a bad level curve, hindered further by bad trainer counts, and the EXP system, or the mandatory use of HMs. Meanwhile, item distribution is not the greatest either. Things are not great, but thankfully we have a 3rd improved version, and it's actually the first one to properly live up to the title.
And Emerald once again begins the same, starting with the game's biggest L, the Pokédex, as it's still packing 200 Mons, with 4 of them being post-game locked. However, when we expand out from the regional decks, we get a mess of Pokemon availability, since there are plenty of new faces to encounter. Although, they have the caveat of being entirely post-game locked. So, on top of our 200 we engage with normally, we get a revolutionary supply of 40 more Pokemon to join the game's catchable lineup, only really to help aid you in completing the most daunting national Pokédex. As 240 total encounters across the game, even if 9 of them can't be gotten without owning everything first. The mons in question included as some kind of cruel joke. Unfortunately, as nice as more obtainables are, their impact goes very unnoticed due to needing the game beat in the first place. What does go noticed, however, is the battle variety. Things are so much better this time around. From evil team grunts with slightly more variety, with both active during story bits to boot, to double battles being far more in your face for battling options, with plenty being able to be taken on as singles if you prefer it. Meanwhile, the true double trainers actually have vision now, being less skippable. The gym leader and E4 teams actually get much better too. Gym leaders getting the big mix-ups through receiving extra mons and potentially swapping out old ones. This allows the 7th gym to be more of a proper battle. Meanwhile, they altered the 8th gym with a new leader that only results in 2 mons being different, with the highlight winning off cheese strats, because of course you're not allowed to play better. The E4 on the other hand doesn't get too much, the first 3 members dropping the ball hard from retaining their full teams of 5. But Drake ditching his duped Flygon for a Kingdra that plays differently to Wands is pleasant. Meanwhile, the new champ fight is the thing to remember. The old 8th gym leader standing in as a champion, unfortunately holding a monotype team to make the solution similar for most of the mods. Probably the same one you used against the last water type boss trainer. And if this was too easy or anticlimactic, at least the old champ is around as a super boss you'll absolutely need to grind for as a thrilling finish. From better boss fights, to better regular battles, to 2 extra segments of gameplay topped off with 1 instance of a 3-piece back-to-back. And most importantly, a multi-battle that, for the only time in this series, has you pick 3 mons instead of allowing all of them. Emerald understands battling. Things seem swell, but unfortunately, the level curve is here to stink everything up. Starting from the front, Gym 1's leveling is the same, as we count aces starting at 15. Gym 2 up by 1 at 19, Gym 3 also up by 1 at 24. Gym 4 again up by 1 at 29. Gyms 5 and 6 sit the same, as it's not like there's new content before their battles. The sections of gameplay before Gym 7 and 8 are the odd parts, however. From Fortree City to Moss Deep City, we've got an injection of new content with the Magma Hideout that absolutely struggles in the leveling department, featuring grunts that rival the wild Pokemon from 28s to 30s, that are actually lower than what Mount Pyre just had, with the exception of the admin dipping both below and above that line. Then there's Maxi, just jumping straight to high 30s for no reason at all. Logic would dictate that the Aqua Hideout section would have their levels adjusted accordingly to fit with the new EXP routing that the Magma Hideout grants. But they just don't, being the same low 30s slop Ruby and Sapphire had without it. And the admin fight can't even touch what Maxi had level-wise. And once again, we're followed by the water route plague of horribly leveled wild mons and optional trainers that are essentially playing hide-and-go-seek for an experience drought that'll likely just throw you at the gym, whose level jump, still at 42, is only really remedied by the new content that hardly worked. So sure, Gym 7 is beat, and now it's the section to Pseudopolis City, which also has more going on. The Space Center plot arrives immediately and just copies the pitiful levels from the Aqua Hideout, only progressing through Maxi once again. To the shock of nobody, just casually jumping up 10 levels from the grunts, because level pacing is just a suggestion apparently. The Seafloor Cavern is similar to the originals, still barely progressing anywhere. Of course, to pull up to Archie. And gamers, get this. Observe a fight that doesn't surpass what Maxi had back in the Space Center. New, but rather newly forced content afterwards forces you down a few water routes on your way to Sky Pillar, hopefully hitting optionals along the way. But it never happens. Shoving us onto Gym 8 now, up 3 levels, sitting at 46, actually seeing progress because Ruby and Sapphire's addition of 1 level from 7 to 8 was just that big of a sin. Where, finally, at the end, the Pokemon League goes down the exact same, with its wide 12-level gap from entry to end. Outside of that, there's not much left to mention. Okay, fine. For some reason, with how little care the level curve received in rebalancing, it shouldn't be a surprise that Rayquaza being catchable during the main story can grant you a level 70 to tear apart the endgame with, through over 10 levels of unmatched performance as a complete afterthought. But overall, the level curve is just a wee bit better, featuring 2 more level spikes for no reason, some more difficulty, and if it really matters, a cheap option to invalidate that difficulty if you truly need it. While we slack in the Mons department, the other aspects finally feel like what a third improved version should, where we reach the end of our Emerald replayability section, with our final note to mention being move tutors. While 2 types exist in the game, we only care about the ones in mainland Hoenn, as they give out a specific attack only once as a means to boost your arsenal even more, but with impact you can actually feel before the credits hit. Otherwise though, we're done. The Gen 3 Hoenn experience gets better, but this time there wasn't even a need to expand the regional Pokédex, just a need to do more. At first glance, the side content offering for Ruby and Sapphire looks dire, but thankfully, this is where things go on the up. Luckily, all of which are present in Emerald too. Opening this can of worms is the Pokénav hosting trainer rematches. In these games, things are handled not the greatest, as once 5 badges are obtained, the feature unlocks, allowing you the chance to rebattle previously defeated trainers with several enhanced items. The annoying part is simply getting the battle. While the Pokénav menu tells you when ones are available, making them so is just up to chance, otherwise based on an invisible step counter as long as you're present on their route. So at least there's some shreds of control over making them happen, despite the fact you probably won't. Because if you want battles, the post-game's only shred of content will probably provide that with the series' worst iteration of the Battle Tower. Because if the blandest 7 battle in a row gauntlet wasn't putting you to sleep, how about we ruin it by not allowing you to drop out? As saying no to continuing is just a quick save, and forfeiting is not an option. But of course, that's too easy, as the worst aspect is just trying to get inside, as here we've only got 2 level options to work with. Level 50 and level 100. Level 100 allowing you to use mons of any level, and level 50 banning everything higher, while both ban restricted legendaries the same. The issue is pretty point blank here. The level 100 rule set is just a nightmare, because that's all you'll fight. A bunch of mons you couldn't bear to grind levels just to be able to properly fight. Meanwhile, the level 50 rule set is a hard cutoff point, otherwise forcing the worst option. And here, we're looking at a post-game feature that'll likely write off the mons that brought you here in the first place, even potentially banning others who can't be gotten until after level 50 for an obvious line that makes your effort feel like a complete waste. At least Crystal had more level options. At least Emerald comes with the new level option, where every iteration to follow Emerald scales higher leveled mons down to level 50 regardless of their starting point. Hence why this is easily the worst version of the Battle Tower to date, and it'll be impossible to top. From here, battle fades as we got all the side distractions the game offers, except breeding, because there's nothing special for it here. So first up on that list is secret bases, being a neat social feature where you simply make a home base in some hidden areas around the world. You customize the place with many buyable items, and that's it. Unless you actually have access to a GBA link cable, as mixing records would allow for your friends' bases to be playable too, where you could even battle their team for the cherry on top. Without it though, I guess you're throwing leftover decorations in your room and calling it a day. And while days may not be properly measurable in these games due to no day-night cycle, there are a few things the clock can do if the cartridge's battery still works. The big one is making the berry system functional. Essentially, berries are just renewable items with the whole creation system to get more. From picking the ones across the world for more tools, to finding an easy place to plant and water them, waiting real life time as the game's a part-time job, reap the rewards to start the cycle anew. While the idea is neat, the real-world accuracy just leads to annoyances requiring you to baby these plants to simply get your reward. Otherwise, without the clock, it's something you can't really use. Important, as berries double in value for the Pokéblock system, being some weird food thing needing a minigame built on timing A presses to make. There is so little substance for it, to the point of lacking anything to criticize. But the Pokéblocks specifically have two purposes. The primary reason being used to give a Pokemon contest stats or nature's modify leveling game, with the secondary forgettable one being the ability to leave one at a food box in the Safari Zone in order to force the wild mons to have a specific pool of natures to generate with. Both features, depending on the color used, determined on the berry used in the first place. Other than this little tech for Safari Zone natures, the only other thing different is the Pokéblock case being mandatory to even enter the Safari Zone at all for some reason. Well, I can't say only, unless we ignore the reworked bait system using Pokéblocks as a means of making a bait tool limited in use. Leaving it as always to be a fun gambler's paradise, just bottlenecked by that gate and the need for the bikes. Anyways, that leads us to contests proper, which the game builds up as the new big thing. After all, it's in the summary menu. That means they really wanted it to succeed. Basically, these are performance shows you can take part in with the goal of placing first using a Pokemon vs 3 foes in one of 5 contests that you're gonna need to specialize your Mon for across different ranks, which are then horribly accessed from different buildings across the region. The challenge is broken up into 2 parts: a visual showcase rewarding you for your contest stats, and a performance showcase where everything can go wrong. Your goal is to earn as many hearts as possible where attacks you and your foe use have many effects to cause absolute chaos to make getting there in the first place hard. Obviously, scoring with moves of the same type as the contest in question is good, alongside spamming the game's invisible combos, allowing for more point gain. But the competition mainly comes down to maxing out the applause gauge for game-changing score, all in an effort to not get owned to win it all. Things are tough with more difficulty later on, but there is a learning curve. And there is sadly progress through the contest stats that you can get capped on, potentially permanently damaging a mon's potential as the one fumble here on our side mode with actual depth. Which means, lastly for gameplay content, is the game corner as always. The offering this time includes the obligatory slot machines you lose your firstborn gambling, and the new addition of roulette, which the house still always wins, with pitiful payouts no matter how much you bet on a color, mon, or single tile. Regardless, you'll never play either of these. Because, of course, if you want the rewards, you can just buy coins with Pokédollars no problem. Which, with the gameplay stuff done now, it's the final note outside of the Emerald specifics. Ribbons. Stashed away in the Pokénav is a little collection of Pokemon and their ribbons. Basically, it's an achievement tracker of the game's small lineup of challenges to be tracked on your mons without any real gameplay impact, leaving this feature as a good groundwork for future titles to build upon, rounding out what's supposed to be the game's lack of content, which outside of real life nonsense, it's not bad. It's just nothing special. But we're about to change that real quick. Finally, Emerald arrives to make the gameplay properly feel whole and redeem the lacking supply of content meant to keep you coming back. So first, an evolution upon the Pokénav's trainer rematch systems, as now we've got the match call feature. Outside of adding pointless, unskippable filler dialogue every so often for both world building and time wasting purposes, the new here is the ability to call trainers, which could result in a rematch becoming available or not. But what we care about is the addition of gym leader rematches, with a different activation method, this time requiring you to do a bunch of battles for the chance of one showing up. But once you get in, you get to battle up to 4 different enhanced teams per leader with much better quality, all of which are double battles for some thrilling battling content, just bogged down by the activation method being slow. But if you want a quick injection of battles, we've got to look at the game's crown gem of content with the Battle Frontier. Consisting of 7 entire battle facilities, you're given a deluge of content to grind out endlessly until your eyes get permanent damage from playing the game for 3 weeks straight without any breaks in between. Each facility having their own gameplay quirks is one thing, but as rewards for playing, everything loops back around to BP as a currency reward for winning, as my means to wrap back around the move tutors again, with these being pricey, but infinite in how many times you can buy them. Of course, being game changers as probably your primary reward focus. Getting back on track, the facilities themselves all abide by new leveling rules. The standard level 50 rule set, which is unchanged, still banning all mons above it, but this new little thing called open level, which simply sets the level of foes to that of your highest level, which can massively cut out on time grinding for a fair fight. Combine that with the ability to finally forfeit mid-game and the ability to quit out in progress runs. This pot of changes actually fixes the battle tower for the most part, whose return is only uniquely distinct among the other facilities, as its choice of double battles will actually allow the use of 4 mons rather than 3. Although, considering the competition, this place is nothing other than simplicity. Taking that simplicity further is the Battle Factory, as the only one of the 6 new buildings to return in a later title. Once again, a 7 battle in a row gauntlet. But now, you don't even use your own mods. Instead, a selection from a random lineup of 6 for your starting point. And after each battle, being given the opportunity to exchange one of these mods with your foes, notably without a summary screen. Variety between runs will be high, just like the demand for your knowledge and luck to go about parting this sea for what's probably the best battle facility here. Although, if all you want is luck, the Battle Palace might be your place. As here, the fight button is just luck and nothing more, as your attacks are chosen at random, potentially with weighted results depending on a Pokemon's nature. While other aspects can be partially in your control, the potential for your turn to go wasted really puts your fates in the hands of luck far more often than one should be comfortable with. Of course, in doses of 7 battles in a row. The battle arena sure is an odd one. Ignoring this 7 battle in a row thing, doubles are an option here since this place is structured on 1v1s. The team is played in the order you pick, going down a chain of 1v1s in battles against a 3-turn timer. If a battle somehow manages to last 3 turns, it'll come down to a tiebreaker, rating your performance, typically rewarding offensive play as an alternate win con if you somehow needed it. The Battle Pike reveals itself next as another facility limited to 7 thing in a row. This time, you lock in your Pokemon and are granted 3 doorways with only 1 hint on what the paths contain. Otherwise being random as you simply try to reach the end beating the odds in this endurance test for a fun time. Similarly, with tackling RNG related environments, we've got the Battle Pyramid. Essentially, here, you and your team of 3 are dumped into a map containing 7 floors without your own held items or bag items, with the goal of scavenging the maps for items while surviving against trainers and wild Pokemon with limited vision. Success, of course, requires plenty of luck and skill, but importantly is carryover, as your successful attempts will actually have their lineups of items carry over to your next runs and your current chain of wins. Of course, rewarding you for not simply bum rushing the exits in this daunting challenge. And finally, we reach the final offering the Battle Frontier provides, and the most revolutionary one at that, with the Battle Dome. The battle gimmick here is pretty mind-blowing. You pick 3 mons to enter with, where you're able to see your opponent's team. And with that knowledge, select 2 to use in battle. And that's it. That's what it does. But the big thing that makes this stick out, the bracket-style tournament format that has an unheard side effect on the facility. Instead of being 7 battles in a row, it's 4 in a row now. For a very nice and quick facility to dive into, runnable at a much faster pace requiring less time from you, which is important, because that's what the Battle Frontier is. A massive time sink of quality battling content that truly taps into the creative team building and higher level of play that you'd usually never have. From battle points to the earnable symbols as a progression tracker, it's truly an endgame goal that can push you towards your limits. Although, while getting to the Battle Frontier is a post-game thing, 3 of the battle facilities could technically be played before that point. The Battle Palace, Battle Arena, and Battle Factory can all be taken out for a ride through the battle tents. These are scattered throughout the world. And for Ruby and Sapphire players, thankfully, evict 3 of the contest centers from existence. So even these 3 lower powered facilities that don't grant BP at all, with frankly bad rewards, even with a faster paced 3 battle in a row setup, was unappealing. At least all 4 ranks of the contest being under the same roof in Lily Cove will make grinding contests much more bearable. Although, thankfully, that's not all for battle content, because Fire Red and Leaf Green's trainer Hill returns for some reason. Once again, allowing you to race against the clock with mild navigation and a focus on double battles to reach the top for pathetic rewards. Of course, built on the open level rule set to make it approachable. And with that, this puts an end to the battle scene. Similarly, altering cave returns from Fire Red and Leaf Green, and here it's completely worthless. Even if you had an e-reader to use this feature, every Pokemon that you gain access to can already be found in Hoenn anyways. And since this is post-game locked, this means there's no advantage of availability, ensuring yet another grave for us to dig, as only a single feature remains for us now. And no, it's not the multiplayer game corner used for Fire Red and Leaf Green's minigames. That's getting saved for another video. But instead, it's the Safari Zone. While the Ruby and Sapphire stuff is still intact, reaching the post-game simply gives you more play space and more mons to encounter. Like how the game adds a few more areas across the world and generally edits layouts quite a bit, which is where we round out the game. Emerald's side content, much like the main game offering, puts all of its eggs in the basket of battles. Just non-stop battles as a good way to end the game on its big sales pitch. In terms of the game's art direction, things are fairly good. In the visual department, things look absolutely lovely, with the overworld probably being the second best a mainline Pokemon game has ever spat out. Only really surpassed, if at all, by something else in the same generation. The overworld just has great visibility, thrilling colors, and even some neat screen effects in areas. Or, God forbid, weather just existing, and in battle, the animations are fast, snappy, and fun to look at, where the mons themselves just simply look nice without any Gen 1 or 2 deformities. And as for the music, great, very much so. But most importantly, the vibes. Where many Pokemon games compared to their remakes fall into percentage thresholds that is utterly outclass the originals in percentages that reach 80s to 90s. Here though, no shade to Oras, but it really feels like 50-50, potentially 60-40 territory from instrumental choices and other effects the new versions actually lack. It really keeps the Gen 3 Hoenn games relevant in terms of its music.
Once again, because we're playing an early Pokemon game, we've got yet another junk food ass plotline. Say it with me, gamers! You move into a new region, stop the professor from becoming a tasty snack, where you then get tasked with completing the Pokedex but never end up doing it before being recommended to do the gym challenge, all while stopping an evil team along the way, one that yes, depends on the game you're playing, but they lack any real personality, since the end result of Awakening the Box Art Legend just ends up being the same, just for you to stop them anyway, where once you're crowned Crown Champ, that's it, the end. Once again, we've got a super simple and boring plot that, much like every Pokemon plot to this point, just barely ekes by as working. The evil teams both end up failing, as regardless of the method, they just want to bring back the legendary to reach an interesting theoretical goal, but of course the same result of almost bringing upon the end times. While the other team actually does nothing in the grand scheme of things, we're finally with the climax of the story done. You have to go out and seek the plot's proper conclusion on your own time. Just why? At least Emerald tries to fix things. Again, damn near the same plot, with the execution of the evil teams being a bit better as the only real difference, since both teams are in play as villains, spreading out the events the two now take on to work on their goals at the same time, just with new but fun stuff sprinkled in. Pretty much the only thing you could ask for at this point to close the game on. No mention of a pitiful main rival, nor the attempted second one. It's just nothing. And as for Pokemon's Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, yeah, they're not as cracked up as they're made out to be. Ruby and Sapphire specifically are the embodiment of mid. Yes, I have to state that mid is not a bad thing. Outside of being yet another great set of games in terms of their shift from Gen 2 to 3 mechanics, the life brought into the overworld from features that do and don't return in future titles, alongside the cereal bowl full of distractions to take part in, allow the games to not feel utterly dead. Fumbling, however, with how soggy the game's content is. A Pokedex count that's okay but doesn't clash too well with the diversity of Le Mans battled, the level curve that would struggle regardless of the game's pitiful EXP systems. The side features are incredibly limited, although if you just want to battle, you're kind of screwed with mediocre trainer rematches in the worst battle facility, which may I remind you is the only shred of post-game content. Everything else is just other distractions that you likely wouldn't care for, really making the game be something you'd frequently run again, and again, still challenged by the game's shortcomings. With Emerald, on the other hand, things are a bit better. As far as downsides go, the main game's Pokemon diversity issues still persist, specifically in the lineup, as the regional dex is still 200, alongside the addition of even more leveling issues despite being a bit smoother, with the good obviously being better battle diversity, more story content, and most importantly, more battle facilities that really made you wish prepping mons for these battles was any shred easier, still being very daunting to do so, making the arrival of such content feel like a bit of a letdown due to not being as accessible team building wise with more dated battle mechanics. Gen 3, unfortunately, with how scuffed the playthrough can be, feels quite a bit like Gen 2, a much needed stepping stone mechanically so we can reach something much better. But unfortunately with Emerald, they end up throwing out great post-game content prematurely. As for reviews and the such, from a scale of 1 to 5, both are a 3, where in Spirit, Ruby, and Sapphire are noticeably lower than Emerald. As for the question of if you should even bother playing the games, Ruby and Sapphire is a maybe, where Emerald is just a fair yes. Where Emerald is able to get away with having fair amounts of post-game content worth sticking around for, Ruby and Sapphire both have to directly compete with a third improved version that actually helps the game's quality, something Crystal and Yellow really didn't do, alongside competing with a set of remakes that do damn near everything these games do well, but even better and so much more seamless. And finally, for personalized recommendations, it's complicated. While I've certainly seized the charm of these games, unfortunately the last few years hasn't allowed it to stand up as much as nostalgia would like me to think. Honestly, the recent GSC re-review might have been the breaking point. From scuffed level curves, tight Pokemon variety, to potentially no post-game, the similarities were far greater than expected. A curse of early Pokemon between this and ORAS simply existing. I don't think I can recommend these unless it's Emerald to the most die-hard fan. Well, gamers, that just about does it for this one. And outside of the whole subscribe, as we're actually going for one more subscriber than you see on screen, there's not really much to say outside of thank you for watching. Once again, big shout out and thank you to Mystic for helping me with this one. Please go check out his channel if you have a chance. Recently, I showed up over there to help him with the best team for ORAS Remastered if you want a little recommendation to get you started. That and his channel will both be linked on the end card in the description. Who knows, if you watch long enough, you might actually get his opinions on the game because, well, you might have noticed that we didn't cover them here. Spoiler alert, they're positive. So until next time, it's time to reset yet another Battle Factory run because of course I get the worst mons of all time.